Hello. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to get started. My name's Amanda, but I'm actually going to kick it over to our president, Anand Sharma, who is going to start us off.
Perfect. Welcome everybody to our exciting seminar today, Battle Governance on Governance, and we've got two exciting speakers here today. So I'm excited to be here and welcome you. And it's been a while, so again, happy to have this noon session. I'd like to introduce to you our two panelists, Amanda Henry, who you all know as our executive director. In her many years of experience being on the rules side, and I know of this, Amanda has guided student councils, our very own board of directors into making sure we follow our rules. So Amanda's here to talk about that. And on the other side, we've got Jennifer Beyer, who is a condominium board president here in Edmonton in a large condo. In her everyday life, she is a facilitator, so she's going to bring that perspective. So I'm excited about this governance battle, as we call it. Let's get ready to rumble. So happy to have them both here today. We'll just briefly go through a couple things, the structure of this, just so you know, it is your Q&A is where you can ask questions. Your cameras will be off, and you're muted during this presentation, but feel free to use that Q&A session. We'll make sure we get your comments in. So acknowledge that we are in Zoom. There'll be polls that we'll be using. We'll be testing that very quickly. So if you have any questions, use the chat box, but Q&A is where we're going. I just want to also acknowledge that we are on acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota, Sioux, Blackfoot, as well as the Métis and the Inuit. It is a welcoming place for all peoples who come from around the world to share these lands as home. So thank you. So I will turn over the floor to our presenters, and we will get this battle started. So Amanda, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much, Anand, and thank you all for joining us. The first thing we're going to do, as Anand hinted to, is a poll. We'd like to just get a little bit of information about who's joining us in the call today. So you should see a poll on your screen now that just asks you to check all that apply about what your role is in your condominium community. We'll leave that open for a few seconds so people can read it and provide that information. I also want to just chat a bit about what we do here. The Canadian Condominium Institute is a host of today's webinar and a national nonprofit that provides condominium education and advocacy across Canada. We are the voice of condominium in Canada. Our local chapter, CCI North Alberta, is the second largest chapter in Canada. And we are both National and North Alberta are about to be celebrating our 40th anniversary. So we're very excited about that. Thank you to those of you who answered the poll. Looks like we've got great turnout. I'm just going to share the results so that everyone can see them, and just thank everybody for that. We have a number of owners and board members on the line today, which is great. I think board members should be the folks who benefit most directly from this, though everybody benefits from a well-governed condominium. We also have some condominium managers, business partners, and residents of condominiums joining us. So that's great to see. Anand has already introduced Jen and I, so thank you for doing that. We're going to just jump right in with talking a little bit about the goal of today's session. We are here today to explore the five aspects of effective meetings: how to engage everyone, dealing with conflict, characteristics of online and hybrid meetings, and how you organize decision making. We wanted to keep it from being dry and talk a little bit about different sets of tools you can do. So I'm here to talk about Team Roberts rules, and Jen is going to talk about other kinds of facilitation techniques. We hope that this session will leave you with an expanded suite of options and tools that you can use at your meetings for different aims, different purposes and contexts. And that you just get some practical tips and hopefully a little bit of a laugh, and not a session that leaves you bored to tears. We do have to do the fine print. CCI's resources are general and educational in nature and do not constitute legal advice. We strongly urge you to consult with your legal counsel or seek other professional assistance for circumstances or situations that are unique to your corporation. Of course, you are going to have questions in this session that are grounded in your experiences at your condo, and we will do our best to answer them, but neither Jen nor I are lawyers, and even if we were, we can't provide legal advice in this kind of session. The other thing this session is not is a detailed review of Robert's rules. I try not to kill people with boredom. Also, Robert's rules is this thick. So we are going to do a bit of a highlights reel. We hope it's an engaging format. So jumping right in, let's do a little bit of a refresh on the elements of a meeting. Just what a meeting is. It's kind of common sense, but we wanted to talk through it. Meetings have these 5 characteristics. There's many different models to talk about meetings, but Jen and I like this one. Meetings are deliberative. And deliberative has a definition. It means a group that has the freedom to act together on behalf of an organization or a group of people to establish decisions that affect the entire group. It means, and this is important, simultaneous communications where everyone can hear and be heard in real time. If it is not that, it is not deliberative. That's particularly important as we have tools like email votes and those kinds of things. Those can be valid sorts of decision-making. We're not talking about them today. We're talking about meetings. They are also a place where the opinion of each member who has a right to be there can be expressed through a vote, and that being on the losing side of a vote doesn't mean being kicked out of the organization. So that's what a meeting is. Meetings have agendas, which are, there's many formats to them, but it's a way of organizing the discussion and giving the group decision-making about what they're going to talk about. Meetings are characterized by discussion and debate about the decisions that you have to make on behalf of the group that you're meeting for. They have motions. This is particularly important in condominium settings where you make technical and legally binding decisions on behalf of a corporation. And they have minutes, which are records. The other important thing that undergirds a meeting is that they're fair. People have equal or equitable opportunities to participate, and we're going to get a little bit into that during the debate today. But you cannot have an effective meeting where everybody at the table is not being treated according to the same rules. So the other thing that, meetings are where decisions happen, especially where you require votes. And there are lots of places in the Condominium Property Act and regulations that do require votes. So it's important to be familiar with those. And a number of experts can help with that, as can these kinds of sessions. So without further ado, today's session is structured as a bit of a back and forth between Jen and I. And I'm going to start us off with talking about Robert and his rules. The Condominium Property Act does not specify a requirement for which parliamentary procedure condominium corporations use. It is a very good idea to have one. Robert's Rules is often the one that people use just because it's familiar. There's a ton of resources around and abridged versions available. There's lots of Robert's Rules in brief. Lots of professionals know how to use them. There are other kinds of rules though, and there's a list of them on the slides that you might have heard of. But just so you know, like Robert's Rules isn't the only one. It's just often treated as the authoritative one. Ironically, people use it often because it's easier to use than some of the others. I want to just touch on, people are going, oh yeah, the Condo Act does require Robert's Rules. I know it's in there. That's in Schedule 4 in the regulations, which is a set of sample bylaws that only applies to condominiums that have not adopted their own. So it's very, very rare that Schedule 4 would apply to you. You would know better than I do if it applies in your condo, but generally speaking, it doesn't. So you don't have to use Robert's Rules, but you should have rules to help defend the fairness and deliberation of your decision making. So I want to just tell you a little bit about Robert to set the stage for the thing. So General Robert, when he passed away, was a brigadier in the American Army and had fought in the American Civil War. How Robert's Rules came to be. As a young man of 26 or so, Robert was posted to a new city and was asked to chair a community meeting at a church about defenses on the off chance that Confederate soldiers were going to attack the community that he was in. He'd never chaired a meeting before, but he thought, yeah, no, it'll be fine. 14 hours later, he emerged from a yelling match and decided that he would never do that again without having a basis in parliamentary law. So he actually wrote to the Library of Congress, and somebody delivered him a copy of the Congressional Rules of Order on a horse. And he started a pocket guide, which evolved into the Roberts Rules that we use to this day. There have been 12 editions of Robert's Rules after Robert Pack wrote several editions in his lifetime. After he passed away in the early 1900s, his family took over and established a foundation to ensure that these rules would continue to evolve. So I want to just another poll time, if I can find where I put them. Pop quiz. Do you know at your condo board meetings how many times each member of the board is allowed to speak to a motion? Pop your answer in the chat and we'll go over a little bit of a lesson before I turn it over to Jen to tell us all about other ways you can do this. While we're answering polls, I just want to kind of paint a picture of what, so Robert's first meeting, he would have gotten to by horse. It would have been on a dirt road somewhere in, I think it was in San Francisco. Would have largely been men in the room, though at a church you might have seen some well-to-do ladies as well. No power. The electricity would have been new if they were using it at all. Would have been wood, no PowerPoints, no emails, no electronic voting, no Zoom. But the personalities at play would have been very much the same as they are now. All right, we're doing pretty good with the answers there, so I'm going to end the poll and just pop it up. So we have a pretty spread of answers: once, twice, no limit, or unsure. That's pretty much what I expected. This is all over the map, depending on the familiarity of the group with the rules, which rules you're using. Fun fact, Robert's Rules specifies that you are able to speak only twice to a motion if you're using like vanilla Robert's Rules, and that anyone who has not yet spoken is given priority in the debate. So this is a pretty structured and rigid kind of debate. It's not really discussion based. Or anybody who is using no limit is either not using Robert's Rules, they're in a traditional sense, and that's fine. There's ways to go about doing that, or they're using something called the small boards variant of Robert's Rules. I just really doubt that many people have their parliamentary ducks in a row to know that, but just yeah, keep that in mind. We might be using Robert's Rules, we might not be using it exactly correctly, and that's okay, as long as we stick to the key points of those meetings, that it's fair, deliberative, and there's discussion and motions and recordings. Okay, thank you, everybody. That's enough about Robert for now. Jen.
Yeah, so I mean, Robert's first manual was published in 1876. That was 10 years before the first car was made, which was a Benz patent motor car that you can see on the slide here. I mean, these rules were literally originally crafted 2 centuries ago, and nothing is the same. We get to meetings with cars, buses, trains, planes, sometimes nothing but a computer and a Wi-Fi signal. We're like Star Trek: The Next Generation here, except for the spaceship piece. And yet we're using these rules that were made when women and people of color were not allowed to attend, let alone chair meetings. So I think that there's a lot of topics and issues that groups of people need to make decisions about, including condo boards. I've been there. These topics and issues are more complicated and more complex, and we have way more options to consider than we ever have before. For condos, I'm just thinking about my experience on the condo board. You know, what cladding material are you going to choose from if you're renovating your building? There's more and rapidly evolving tech that needs to be considered, like solar power and electric vehicles. We have shifting demographics. And so that means we have a wide variety of opinions and preferences to consider when we have a really diverse ownership in our condo corporation. Condo corporations weren't even a thing when Robert's Rules were developed. So collaboratively running a multi-family dwelling never figured in to the design of Robert's Rules. My standpoint is that in the 21st century, we need 21st century tools and processes for effective meetings.
Thanks, Jen. One more pop quiz, and then we're going to dive into debate. Do you know if your condominium bylaws identify Robert's rules or some other kind of decision-making if they're silenced? So just let us know in the poll if you know off the top of your head what rules your condominium uses, if any. You're very fast on this one. I appreciate it. That means nobody cheated and looked it up unless you're ninjas with your bylaws. All right, we've got most participants weighing in, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Do you know what your bylaws identify as your decision-making dialogue? About 43% of the call says Robert's rules. As I said, it's often the conventional use. Rules are silent. That happens too. And I don't know. And that's fine. You can look it up afterwards, maybe ask your chair, or maybe we will help you figure out some tools that you can use in your meetings going forward. All right. Round one, organizing decision-making. Jen.
All right. So decision-making for condo boards is all about considering options. It's about weighing the pros and cons of choices. It's about identifying intended and unintended consequences of choices. It's about considering how your owners and your members are going to react to decision and what they're going to be looking for. This needs to be done with both short and long-term perspective for a wide demographic of owners, renters, and residents, considering evolving technology, considering changing expectations, amongst many other things. So sometimes the options are few or simple, or the decision is clear and easy, but other times, many times, they're not. Either way, I think when you're organizing decision-making, you want a process that identifies the decision to be made, lays out how options are identified, makes room for everyone to participate in information sharing and discussion of the pros and cons and consequences of each of the options, and then identifies how specifically the decision will be made. So is it by a simple majority, 50% plus one in favor? Is it a substantive majority, which is usually 2/3 or 3/4 majority in favor, depending on your bylaws, or a special resolution majority, which is 75%, or consensus, maybe everyone needs to agree. Roberts does this. Don't get me wrong, Robert's rules does this, lays all this out, but Robert has made it so much more complicated than it needs to be, especially when the decision to be made needs dialogue and deep consideration and room to change your mind.
Au contraire, Robert's rules makes it clear and simple. Roberts requires an agenda, which breaks the meeting down into a series of motions. Each motion is a decision requiring a yes or no answer. You don't always have to have a conversation about how you're going to make the decision first. The rules are there. Agenda, motion, yes, no. Abstentions are also possible in Robert's rules. And just a quick aside, an abstention means you are registering a I didn't vote. It doesn't figure into the count. You just count yes or no to figure out if you passed the motion. But sometimes abstentions are required if you are trying to engage in ethical decision-making, where you need to show that you didn't participate because of your responsibilities as a board member under the Condominium Property Act, Section 28. Once a decision is made under Robert's rules, it's locked in. Passing a conflicting motion is out of order unless you reconsider the decision that you've already made, which requires a formal vote and a larger majority than it did to make a decision in the first place, which, to Jen's point, is where a substantive majority comes in. I think that Robert's rules helps us by breaking meetings down into a series of predictable yes or no questions. It's easy to stay on the same page if you all know what to expect.
So I don't know about simple and clear. I mean, sure, simple, but major limits on the dialogue. How many dialogues are yes, no questions? Roberts limits the number of times people can speak to an issue. That's not a dialogue. When a lot of things, including bylaws for condos, need dialogue. and you need a motion. So you need to select one of your choices before you can speak about it. But then that limits you to speaking about each option one at a time. How do you change your mind about one option until you've considered and dialogued about the others? I just don't think Roberts lends itself to complexity, to dialogue, to changing your mind, to putting new options forward for consideration as the dialogue and the discussion continues. I think it could result in meetings outside of meetings, and often does, where you actually discuss and debate and try to understand each other and where you're coming from. But no one needs more meetings. No one wants more meetings. So why wouldn't we just have the meeting in the meeting?
Ding! End of round one. And ladies and gentlemen and gentlefolk, please choose a winner. Who do you think carries the day in organizing decision making? Is it Amanda with Team Roberts Rules, or is it Jen with modern decision making?
This is fascinating. Who's going to win?
There's a winner emerging, but it's been bouncing back and forth.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you folks for weighing in. I'm going to end the poll and share results so that you can tell that I'm not doctoring it. Ding, ding, ding. Round one goes to Jen with 50% of the votes, promoting a modern take. Amanda and Ty tied. Fine, I'll see if I can win the next round. Round two, engaging everyone. I get to start off on this one. And I want to talk about Robert's Rules as a practical guide to parliamentary law for meetings where regular people are making decisions. That sounds dry, but it's very important in a meeting that unless you have a lawyer or a trained parliamentarian at every meeting, you need some roadmap to make sure that your decisions are fair and respect the rights of the participants. Robert's Rules does that by making sure at minimum, your meeting respects the will of the majority. The majority wins, they vote. The decision that the majority wants is the one that gets carried. The minority in the set Robert's Rules provides a lot of protection for people who have a dissenting view. They have the opportunity to participate. They get the meeting call, which is required under the number of days required to duly call a meeting. Each individual member gets to participate and is treated the same way. And those who are not present but have the right to participate are made aware and have the ability to hold decision-making accountable. And then it also balances all of these in sum total. Everyone involved in a meeting that's being governed by Robert's Rules has the right to make the maximum effort to have their position declared the will of the assembly to the extent that it can be tolerated in the interests of the entire body. That's actually directly from Robert's Rules, which is why it sounds like it was written by a man in the 1800s. But what Robert's Rules gives us is a clean way of understanding how we respect one another in a meeting and how we move decisions forward so that we don't end up trapped down rabbit holes and circular thinking or having to have a discussion about how we're going to have a discussion. We've been doing it this way for over 100 years. So there are lots of resources out there to help people learn about how to engage in debate this way. And their right the right to do it is respected and enshrined in a manual. Everyone has equal opportunity to be heard, and each gets to decide how they want to engage and exercise their rights. Jen.
Parliamentary law. For real, condo boards are not parliaments. We don't have someone wearing a fancy robe, sitting in a special chair, holding a scepter, refereeing our discussions or our decision making. So I don't know why we would use the same processes and tools as a government for our decision making. I think what's important is that everyone has the opportunity to speak on each decision. Everyone's perspectives and ideas are heard, understood, and considered. Everyone considers short and long-term impacts of decisions and the different impacts on different owners and residents, and that where people are respectful of each other. Everyone on your board brings something valuable to the conversation because of their different knowledge, their different experience, and things like that. It all helps create the most robust and accurate picture of the question that you're trying to answer and all the possible options for answering that question. You need everyone's wisdom for the wisest results, which frankly is something legislatures and parliaments aren't really great at these days if you ever watch Question Period. But it's also why you ideally want a diverse board in terms of demographics, education, length of time living in your condo, et cetera, et cetera. So how can you engage everyone in a modern way? I think ask the people who haven't spoken in a while what they're thinking and where their heads are at. So you could say, hey, Anand, we haven't heard from you in a bit. Do you have anything to add? What are you thinking about? When you're starting a new when you're starting a new conversation on a new decision, you could start it by going around and hearing from everyone individually first before you actually start the debate and the back and forth. As you're wrapping up the conversation, again, you could go around one at a time and ask everyone for any final comments or concerns. And I think it's really critical not to rush people when they're speaking and to be okay with a couple moments of silence, because some of us just need time to collect our thoughts before we're ready to speak up.
Okay, I like the scepter, okay? And also that meeting sounds long. The right to participate doesn't always need to be exercised. And one of the things I really like about Robert's Rules is that it gives you the opportunity to opt in when you have something to say. Meetings need to be efficient, and Robert's Rules does that by providing clear, detailed instructions that give everyone the same right, but leave the decision of how to exercise that right up to each individual member.
Fair point. Sure, it doesn't always need to be exercised, but I do think people can say, I have nothing to add when you call on them or check in with them to see if they want to add anything. The efficiency lost with checking in with everyone and ensuring everyone has a chance to participate is so minimal. And the feeling of buy-in, I think, that comes from meaningful engagement and decision-making is really worth the few extra minutes it would take.
Ding, ding, ding. Round 2. Let's find out who won. Robert's Rules, Jen's Rules, or tie.
This is another close one, Amanda.
This one's a lot closer than the first round, which pleases me. But it looks like you're going to edge me out again, Jen. This time a 42-33 split, but the ties are holding steady at 25%. So
I like it.
Great. All right. Round 3, inclusive decision making. Jen, take it away.
Yeah, so diversity is having a seat at the table. It's the presence of difference in terms of identity and lived experience in that group, in that setting. So on your condo board. Inclusion is about how or whether people feel valued for their difference and can participate fully. And then equity efforts acknowledge that barriers and advantages exist in different combinations for different people. And that it includes setting up processes, tools, things like that to address the barriers that people experience so that they can participate. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are critical today, even in condos. So for example, are your doorways, your front entrance, your unit entrances, your patio doors, your party room doors, et cetera, are they wide enough for wheelchairs to enter through? Do you have remote entry ability on doors for people with physical mobility challenges? Do your gyms have different machinery for different physical abilities? Do you need to communicate in languages other than English? Do you use simple language so that as many people as possible can understand what you're communicating? None of this is really possible, including even identifying possible barriers that you need to address, until you have a diverse board and they're all included in a really meaningful way in your board work. How do you do this? You get to know your board colleagues and what they care about or what they cared about enough to join the board. You invite agenda items from all of your board members. And you can do that in a couple of ways, either one-on-one or anonymous editing of an online document or email or anything like that. You provide as much information on agenda items before the meeting as possible so people have time to review that information and understand it before they show up. You make sure everyone has a chance to speak. You ask people, especially if they have a different viewpoint, what their viewpoint is. Identify factors or experience that's different from your own, value and respect what they share based on that. Ask people what they need from the board to be able to participate meaningfully, and then do that. And then I think one of the most critical things actually for inclusive decision making is to set ground rules together that it's impossible for one person to see the whole picture, and you need everyone to participate, and the value you place on that so that everyone is aware of those ground rules and can follow them.
Yeah, I'm not even going to pretend that Robert's Rules has this issue covered. It doesn't. And it's important for condominiums to understand that. Parliamentary procedure is pretty strictly about equality. Everyone has the equal option and opportunity to participate, and how they go about getting to the floor is sort of up to them. I think it's also fair to acknowledge a challenge with Robert's Rules that hopefully some of Jen's tools help us address, that sometimes in Robert's Rules settings, you see situations where people with the most knowledge of the rules carry the day. And that's unfortunate. That's not how Robert's Rules is meant to work. If you read the very beginning as a member of a board, you would know that the idea is to lift all voices up in a way that tries to take feelings out of it, but that's not always the case. Equity and accommodation require additional tools and are the legal responsibilities of condo corporations. Technically, Robert's Rules requires people to stand up to be recognized at AGMs. It actually says you must stand to see the chair. As I'm sure you all know, that's not always possible in condominium communities. You have folks with mobility challenges or injuries, and you have to make allowances in other ways. It's also totally impossible to see whether, like, if I were to stand up on my camera right now, gets a little silly in an electronic meeting. Robert's Rules does not overrule provincial legislation. Condos must abide by rules that deal with the diversity and inclusion, including PIPA, the privacy legislation in Alberta, the Alberta Human Rights Act. In cases where you have employees, the Employment Standards Code, the Occupational Health and Safety Code, and a whole host of other rules that exist to address the needs to provide equitable supports to people living in Alberta. A lot of this is common sense, but you're going to need some tools beyond what Robert's Rules can offer. And CCI offers a lot of great content about that kind of thing around how human rights work in condos and a lot of the stuff that Jen just listed. So Robert's Rules is not an accommodation tool. It is a meeting procedures tool. And that means Jen won, because I'm not even going to try. I don't want to muddy the waters. That's not a good faith educational resource. So congratulations, Jen, for winning that round. I'm going to see if I can win this next round, which is bing, bing, bing. Dealing with conflict. Meetings often have conflict. People have strongly held opinions, and there's lots of diverse options, and it can be pretty stressful to make decisions in a condominium context about the physical and social nature of your home. Robert's Rules helps with conflict by setting clear ground rules where everyone has equal rights. Using these rules correctly can help your corporation do two things. Try and simmer down the emotions and keep people focused on what you're actually debating and why. And it can demonstrate you did your due diligence should it ever come to the worst case scenario in a condo where you have to defend the decisions you made. It gets really important to use Robert's Rules correctly when you're doing this, just to prove that you did do that following that parliamentary authority. The shared understanding of what any rules, but Robert's Rules in particular, are for. Debate leading to a decision that is supported by the majority. You make decisions in accordance with your bylaws and legislation. The legislation has requirements around how the board is supposed to operate. I already referenced Section 28, but the Condo Property Act and Robert's Rules act in concert together. Like if you have this thought in your head, it will help with those conflicts. Every member of the board, the Condominium Property Act says, every member of the board shall act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interest of the corporation. This is found in Section 28. I just want you to have a think about what that means. If you're there to be honest, to act in good faith, to act in the best interest of the corporation, conversations are going to be frank and difficult, but calling each other names is not in the best interest of the corporation. Privileging what you want to see happen in your suite, as opposed to having a difficult, reflection about what's going to work in the condominium as a whole. It's a tough line to walk, and we ask a lot of condominium boards when we ask that. How Robert's Rules supports that. is a section called decorum. And I'm sure you've all heard this word before. It gets used in lots of different ways, but what it means is you keep your comments specific to the motion. It's not in order to engage in personal attacks. You don't attack each other's motives or make assumptions. You need to take each other's comments at face values and battle each other and discuss and debate on the merits of the question and on the merits of the argument, not on the merits of the person. And this is built into Robert's Rules, believe it or not. Robert's Rules also has a weird convention of addressing remarks through the chair instead of to each other. It feels weird. Most assemblies that use Robert's Rules don't actually use this convention. They talk to each other across, I don't agree with Pam, or I don't agree with Anand. But I've chaired assemblies that are really, really rigid about using the chair. And instead of saying I don't think Anand is right, I would say, Mr. Chair, I appreciate Anand's comments, but what I think is, and it actually does have an effect of subtly changing the dynamic in the room. You're not yelling at each other, you're yelling through a neutral third party. And most people's respectability politics weigh in a little bit. So it helps. It's not a panacea, but it helps. I think it's also worth reviewing decorum and any other rules or norms that your board has at the beginning of a meeting to make sure that you're all on that same page and bring that intent into a meeting. And Robert's Rules has all of that in it. So, Jen.
Yes. So conflict, I think, is often rooted in differences in values, though it may also stem from people having different information that they're basing their opinions on. I think it's important that you set out your decision-making processes in writing, not the 700 pages in Robert's Rules, but your own writing, before you ever find yourself in conflict, so that you don't make the disagreement even worse by disagreeing on how to disagree. I think critical to dealing with conflict is building a culture of trust and respect on your board, so that even disagreement can be a respectful dialogue, hopefully a calm, respectful dialogue. Conflict doesn't have to be a negative experience, even though most of us don't like it and try to avoid it. We don't have to be fearful of conflict. I look at conflict as an exploration of differences of opinion and perspective. Conflict is being curious about the range of options and whether there were options you weren't aware of, or benefits and drawbacks to options you haven't considered yet, and exploring that in conversation with other people. Guiding principles or group norms are critical for your boards and a huge support for decision-making, especially in conflict situations. So how do you demonstrate respect on your board? Do you require demonstration of understanding of others' points of view? So do you require people to paraphrase or check back or something like that? In conflict situations, it's critical that your decision-making processes that you use, that they ensure that everyone can state their opinion or perspective on an issue, that conversations and points are made about options, not people, that questions of clarity are asked of everyone to ensure everyone has the same understanding of each other's viewpoints. I like to, depending on the situation, I like to have people point out the drawbacks of their preferred options and the benefits of the options that others have put forward, to really force people to practice due consideration of everything on the table. I think in conflict situations, especially, your decision-making process needs to ensure that you're identifying assumptions or values that underlie viewpoints. And you know what? Honestly, one of the best tools is, if things get heated, take a break.
Agreed. Taking a break is a great option, and that culture of trust and respect is really important. I posit that Robert's Rules is a practical tool to deal with the how of having those respectful debates, even on issues that are contentious. There's also pretty clear mechanisms in Robert's Rules for what to do if someone's not playing by the rules. Members can raise an objection about the conduct of others. This is actually what a point of order is, that someone's conduct in the meeting isn't in order. What out of order means in Robert's Rules is that's not how we play here. So, if you showed up at a hockey game with a football, you'd be out of order. That's how Robert's Rules deals with that. The chair rules on whether the point of order is well taken, which means, yes, I agree with you, or no, I don't agree with you. And much like a referee at a hockey game, I'm going full sports metaphor here, that's the end of it. The referee makes the call and you all gather yourselves up and get back to the business of the meeting. Of course, chairs make mistakes. And if the chair really has made one here, there is an appeal mechanism in Robert's rules. It's a little bit difficult to do, but you can find it in the book and there's lots of resources online. But there is no appeal of the appeal. You can't just kind of go on and on and on. It's like a court. There's, it's actually like a sports game. Modern hockey, call, appeal, done. Conflict can be okay. In condominiums, there's likely going to be diverse and strongly held opinions about what the best path forward is on the kinds of decisions that you make. What I like about Robert's Rules is it creates a system of expectations and a procedure for decision-making that balances everyone's rights and makes it very clear that at the end of the day, you respect the majority decision and move on with the business of the condo.
Yeah, fair enough. I do think that being able to raise objections about the conduct of others is important, but I think agreed upon guiding principles or group norms, which I mentioned before, is a tool for this. So for example, depending on what's in your group norms, someone can say, we agreed that we wouldn't cut each other off and that we'd let people finish before we began speaking and you interrupted them. Can we please let them finish? I also agree that a strong chair is critical, but I don't think Robert's Rules makes chairs strong. Skills and aptitude and having and using tools makes chairs strong, but I think those tools should be 21st century, not Robert's. And I agree, conflict is okay. It's uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be negative. And I think really well explored conflict with really good rules that you're following often actually leads to the best decisions for condo boards. It does require inclusive decision-making and dialogue processes that I don't think Roberts is well set up for.
Well, fine then. You get the final word in this round. Ding, ding, ding. Who won round 4? Robert's Rules on dealing with conflict. Robert's Rules, Jen's approach, or tie? And there's only one round left. We will keep it concise so that we have time for the questions that we see appearing in the chat. Just a reminder, it's difficult from the panelist perspective to keep track of the chat, though I know Anand is helping us with that. It's much easier for us if you post your questions in the Q&A, and then Jen and I can get to them at the end. All right.
This is like the Oilers and LA game. Like it's like close. It's so close. I'm riveted on the back end side.
Actually, yeah, round 1 was game 1. I got blown out of the water. Round 2 actually was more like that other game where I got blown out of I'm the LA Kings in this. I don't like that. Anyway, I win with a neck and neck break. Amanda with 46% and Jen with 42% and Ty with 13%. Thank you very much, team. Round 5. Hybrid and online meetings.
Well, I mean, so my obvious argument is computers and the internet didn't exist when Robert first wrote his rules. Star Trek: The Next Generation wasn't even a dream. So how could they have considered these unique meeting spaces in their design is like completely beyond me. Hybrid and online meetings are much more orchestrated conversations than in person. It's also, I mean, let's all be honest, so easy to disengage and miss comments in conversations. Like how many of us check emails or play solitaire during these things? I mean, not me. I'm totally paying attention to my board meetings, but lots of us do, right? That's really easy. There's also a whole other set of challenges to inclusion. Strength of Wi-Fi signals, your tech and hardware and whether it's up to date. Not everyone's comfortable on camera. And actually, I was recently talking to someone who was fairly seriously harassed from another participant in an online meeting, in an online space, and it is influencing their decisions on all of their future online engagement and whether they're going to be camera on and speak or use the chat because of this really negative experience of harassment. It's next to impossible to read body language and facial expressions, especially if cameras are off, obviously. It's tough to have a pulse on the level of agreement or level of uncertainty or who wants to speak up but can't find the mute button fast enough. Like hybrid and online are really, really tough. This is where decision-making processes that include going around the table or the room at least once at the beginning or end of a conversation about a question or decision and asking everyone one at a time if they have anything to share can be really powerful. I think hybrid meetings are by far the toughest, even tougher than online. I've done a couple of them. You need really unique technologies, cameras and mics in the room so that everyone online can see everyone in the room, and then you need speakers in the room so that everyone in the room can hear everyone from online. That means you also need screens and projectors in the room so that everyone in the room can see everyone online. Most people forget about the people online when they get engaged in the room, which is natural and understandable. Especially when responses to something are visible in a room, most people are cued, oh, I'm done. And they forget that, oh, I have to look online. So I've had to interrupt chairs at hybrid events I've been involved in when they've asked for a vote on a motion, they scan the hands in the room, and then they move on because they forget to check about the voting results of the online participants and how those shake out. You always need two people for hybrid meetings. Almost always you need two co-chairs, a chair in the room and someone to keep an eye on technology. So it gets really, really difficult.
Yeah, hybrid and online meetings are absolutely a new challenge, especially with the new provisions in the Condominium Property Act from last March that create an expectation of having these options for general meetings. One thing though, Robert's Rule, the newest edition of Robert's Rules does have help. I've mentioned this before, something to keep in mind for hybrid online things. It's only a meeting in the technical sense of the word if everyone can participate and hear and be heard in real time. So to Jen's points about the technology, that's very, very explicit in Robert's Rules of Order, and it's suggested in the Condominium Property Act. So you'd be kind of off base if you called it a meeting and you couldn't hear everybody. Hybrid and online meetings absolutely require different rules than in person. So Jen mentioned some highlights, but it's not as easy to go in camera online as it is in person. So you can't just close the door and start talking. And you need to consider what happens if someone's computer crashes, including the chair or the meeting host. If you're going to do electronic, telephone, or hybrid meetings, you need a process that's in your bylaws. You have to put it in your bylaws. The Condominium Property Act entertains this, and Robert's Rules says, like, in your bylaws, man. Good news. If you have this edition of Robert's Rules, if you can see it, the white one, that's the new one, and it's got 4 sample bylaw templates in the back. It would need to be adapted for the Condominium Property Act, but it has a place to start. Just if you're using this one, this black one, you're out of date. You should get a new one. They're available on Amazon. I haven't seen a ton of local booksellers that carry Robert's Rules because there's not a ton of meat in the city, but it's definitely available.
I can't believe you have 2 copies.
You have to update to the newest edition, man. All the bylaws say so. I also want to point out that in CCI's member-only resource center, this isn't technically Robert's Rules, but I'm also the ED of CCI North Alberta. We did a session at the 2021 Expo with RMRF and Willis Law, where the 2 lawyers walk us through electronic and hybrid AGMs in Alberta condos. So if you use the templates in Robert's Rules plus the learnings from that session, your board should be in good shape to develop an online and hybrid meeting process that respects all the stuff that Jen and I have been debating over the course of this conversation.
I didn't know about the sample bylaws in Robert's Rules, so I think that's awesome. And that combined with what you have in your resource center actually seems like super amazing for online and hybrid meetings, and probably your best bet. I think there's other things to consider and that you need to do to ensure meaningful inclusion of all directors or members in the conversation. But the resources you just listed actually sound really good.
I know, Jen, you have a ton of experience and insight on the practical reality of this too. I still think it's important to have good parliamentary procedure for these new kinds of meeting spaces, but the tips that you provided and things that condo boards need to keep in mind and the tech and stuff, that's all really helpful. So I hope our participants got some out of that round of debate. And sorry for anybody where the poll was just hanging out on your screen there. I see I stopped sharing it. Last round, who won round 5? Oh, dang. Well, if I am the LA Kings, with any luck, this is not how the hockey game goes. Amanda wins this round with 61%, Jen with 17%, and a tie with 22%. So thank you very much. winner of the debate. We're not actually going to crown a winner. That was a great conversation. And, as much as we would, we're not here to win, we're here to help. So we want to jump to key takeaways. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to decision-making, just like there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to condominium living. We have a huge diversity of boards and people and experiences and complex types and management styles. There's lots and lots of room. Even Robert's Rules has customization options depending on the size and format of the meeting. So most boards will be using what's called the small boards, well, what I call the small boards variant. Robert's Rules has a longer name for it, but there is that idea that like in a meeting with 70 people versus a meeting with 7 people, there's different expectations for what a productive conversation is going to be. Regardless of whether you use Robert's Rules, Jen's tools, and some of the other tools that are available, things that good meetings have in common. Processes that are fair, consistently followed, and understood by everyone participating. So, we talk a bit about information meetings and condo owner essentials. You don't have to have a formal one, but if you're going to have people coming to a board meeting, it's not a bad idea to set aside a few minutes, especially at a turnover meeting, to just go through whatever your rules and expectations are and answer questions and make sure that there's a common understanding. AGM, same thing. You can do it informally half an hour before, or with Zoom, you can do tools. Just get the nerd on your board to answer questions. With all my love to my fellow nerds, but I often do this for boards that I sit on, where I'll just do a Q&A with people who are interested in learning a little bit more about what the meeting is going to be like. There have to be equal opportunities for everyone who has the right to be there to participate in debate and decision making. This is pretty important. Like, I'm not a lawyer, but it's important to the point that it's bound into Alberta's parliamentary tradition and common law. If you are discriminating against people in a meeting, and then you face challenges to the decisions that are made in that meeting, you're going to have some trouble. So it's really important for things to be equal. Respectful participation from members. I know that this is a big challenge, and I hope that Jen and I's tools have talked a little bit about some of the ways that you can address that. But meetings are a team sport, and everybody has to kind of bring their best foot forward into the meeting. We have clear, actionable motions and decision items. This was not a session on how to write good motions, but it's really important that when everyone understands exactly what they're voting on, you meant what you said what you meant, and when the motion is being used to guide the implementation of the meetings later on, it's really clear what you meant. Particularly important if you're directing contracts or condo managers and where there's money involved. And you need good records, which we didn't get into today, but your minutes, same thing, really have to capture those decisions. You need to focus on what's in the best interest of the condo and the corporation and the owners as a whole. Tall order, I know, but those are the big pieces that we want to talk about. I also want to give a quick hack before we move over to questions. It's actually possible to move between Robert's Rules and other decision-making processes. The easiest way to do that is just to call a recess. And instead of taking a break, use some of the tools Jen talked about. Go around the room, do a check-in, have a brainstorm, do a straw poll, use tools like Dotmocracy or a pros and cons list, and take 10 minutes and have that more informal brain dump to try and get some clarity. The other way to do it, which I call the most responsible way, but it's kind of up to what's going on in your condo, is to draft a procedure for moving into a deliberative model and adopt it. Robert's Rules allow us for this. It's called a special rule of order. The big thing, once you pass it, is just to make sure that it lives somewhere, like in your board binder, so people can see what you're doing. One that I used to, I was on a kind of informal grassroots board a while ago, and we adopted a special rule called brainstorm mode, where somebody would literally say, motion to move into brainstorm mode. And if that motion passed, you would have a popcorn conversation where everybody threw ideas up on the table and then figured out through discussion and dialogue what the motion needed to be if you needed to workshop something complicated, and then end brainstorm mode, move back to the yes or no discussion.
Yeah. I just want to add that, with increasing diversity in our communities and in our condo communities, with these complex issues that we're debating and decisions we're trying to make, I just think we have to be open to other kinds of decision making at the same time. And different cultures have different approaches to decision making, and we want to be considerate of that too. I just think ditch Roberts entirely and build a process that fits for you instead of motioning to take a break from Roberts because it's not working. and then doing whatever it is that would work for you. I don't know all the ins and outs of Roberts, but in my mind, most people don't. And so you're never really totally sure if you're following it. I don't think processes have to be complicated. Your meeting rules do not have to be complicated. They certainly don't have to be 700 pages. They probably don't have to be 7 pages. Just figure out the steps for each of the things good meetings have in common, and you're good to go. Write that down so that your process is there. You can share it with new board members. You can refer back to it when you're unsure. But I just think I guess I think Roberts overcomplicates some of these things. Not that we shouldn't take some of the good ideas from Roberts, but let's simplify them for our condo boards.
Jen, the battle's over.
Oh.
All right, are we ready for questions, Amanda?
We sure are.
So the first one I can answer, the Oilers are going to win 5-3 tonight. If I'm right, somebody needs to get me a matcha green tea frap from Starbucks. Just putting it out there. That's what I want. So 5-3 Oilers, Game 7 coming up. So that
I
answers one.
volunteer to get you your frap if it's
Yes,
5.
thank you. Does one form or another of rules need to be utilized? It was one of the anonymous questions.
So I can answer that. You don't have to have a specific named guide. Lots of boards use Robert's rules because it's easier than thinking this through yourself. And in some ways it's cheaper because if you want to design your own meeting orders, some boards, depending on the complexity of your condo, you might need to talk to a lawyer about that. What you need to do is follow the key principles, which is equal participation, fairness. It's a deliberative assembly. It has a format for setting the agenda. And the rules that you write apply to everyone the same. So, you could do the Willy Wonka condo rules of procedure as long as they say things like everyone gets 2 minutes to speak in each speaking turn and gets a maximum of 3 speaking turns per motion. And it can't say everyone gets 3 minutes except for Amanda because she sucks. She gets 30 minutes. That's just 30 seconds, not 30 minutes. Holy cow. You can't be, so you just have to maintain it. Where I would start is and Jen's got some resources too. Most guides have a front page that kind of just talks through the overlying principles. Robert's rules, it's actually called Principles and Underlying Parliamentary Law. And it just walks through the characteristics that your rules have to have if they're going to be binding. Lots of groups do it by convention as well. I just think that's a little bit risky when you're dealing with things like special assessments and reserve fund studies where there's lots of money involved. It's easier to have something written out.
Quick question for either of you. What is the more modern version of Roberts, or what is a more modern meeting guideline format than Roberts?
Jen, do you want to start or do you want me to list them off?
Go ahead.
Okay. So one that Jen and I have actually presented on before is there's different models of consensus decision making, where instead of trying to get to a majority decision, you're trying to get to a decision that everybody in the room can live with. Consensusdecisionmaking.org has a rundown, and there's a couple of other resources. There's a set of rules called Democratic Rules of Orders. I've never used them because they're behind a paywall, but they were written, in the last 40 years instead of the last 140 years. There's something called the Carver model, which I don't love, but lots of corporate boards use it. And like a clean, simple one that's modern and would kind of do well enough in a condo context, but is still that Roberty style of rules, is Nathan's Rules of Order, which is again available on Amazon and stuff. Jen,
there's also some books like Breaking Robert's Rules and Roberta's Rules, and so there's some uber simplified takes on Robert's rules as well that you could look at.
Excellent. I'm going to flip to this question. Would Robert rules abridged be sufficient as a framework for meetings?
Meetings that are going well? Absolutely. Meetings that are going poorly, you're going to need a deep cut. Just Robert's rules abridged covers the kind of key, like what I broke down in the debate around agenda, motion, yes, no, abstain, how you amend, no amendments to the amendment, that kind of thing. But if you start getting into like, I need to appeal from the decision of the chair, the thicker version is what you're going to need to. Vast majority of the time, if you got a copy of abridged on hand, you're going to be okay.
Great. Evelyn asks a great question. Does the act require that everyone be visible to each other for a hybrid meeting or just be able to hear each other? It's a technical question.
The Act defines electronic meetings as follows, and this is in J2 of the definitions. An electronic means in respect of attending or holding a meeting means a method of electronic or telephone communications that enables all persons attending the meeting to hear and communicate with each other instantaneously, including without limitation, teleconferencing and computer network-based or internet-based communication platforms. So the Act specifically references hearing and being heard.
Interesting. Excellent. Thank you for that. Question from Carissa. Zoom webinar versus Zoom meetings. Are they required to all be able to speak at once, or can you bring them up to the panel of the webinar like you would in an in-person meeting where you would have to walk to a mic? So treating it like an in-person where, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Jen, do you want to, you got a lot more experience actually running them than I do.
Yeah, I mean, most of the hybrid events I've done have used Zoom meeting, and it's been really fine. People have been very respectful and only unmute and use their microphone when they're called upon. If it was a more contentious meeting and you were worried about someone speaking over or speaking out or continuously trying to undermine the meeting, I can see where Zoom webinar would be preferred, and you can promote them to panelists. Keep in mind that if it is a super contentious meeting and people are really upset and you're controlling microphones that strongly, you are very, very likely going to get pushback on your meeting from your members and claims of being limited in their ability to speak and raise concerns and participate.
Great.
I just want to touch on, like, in no form of meeting is it in order for somebody to bust in and just start yelling. That's like, and I know that happens. I've been to those meetings. That's never in order. That's never how a meeting is supposed to work. Online, just to Jen's point, gives you great power that you need to use with great responsibility. Whereas, like, as much as I would love to be able to mute people in person, sometimes you have to talk them down.
That was a Superman line, wasn't it? Great power comes. Yeah, oh yeah, right. Okay, so really quickly, there was one question in the chat box that I think is important from Roger. Is it a good idea to record the minutes to refer back when preparing minutes? It's a little bit off topic, but also kind of within the context.
So I would say it is not a good idea to use a recording as minutes. That's a problem. So, because minutes are not a transcript of a meeting, they're a summary of the decisions that were taken, and in some case, like key things like where the meeting was, when the meeting was, who was there, when it started, when it ended, and what you decided. So, transcript doesn't do that effectively, and a video recording doesn't do that effectively. It also creates massive privacy problems that you'd have to work through with your lawyer around, like, you can't redact a video. You pick up sort of side chatter and stuff. In terms of using it as a way to prepare the minutes, practically speaking, it depends. It wouldn't be useful for me because I would just think I was going to review the recording and then I never would, and then I'd have to remember to delete it later. But if your secretary is more comfortable with having that refer back to, and like it's going to be easier to get those minutes sorted, you can do that. You do need a records management procedure though for the recording so that you are getting rid of it when you are finished with it, because otherwise it can be caught up in the access to information requirements and the regulations, and you get back into that issue with the lawyer around, like, well, Tara called Dwayne a doofus over at the coffee stand, like while she was like sitting in her kitchen, and the meeting recording picked that up. That's not responsive to the records request, but how do I get it out? Let's not call people to meetings.
Excellent. Jen, you responded to a good question about persons with hearing impairments and how they participate. Go ahead.
Yeah, just that. So on video conferencing like Zoom, there's closed captioning apps that you can install and activate. And so on Zoom and other video conferencing, Google Meet, Teams, whatever you choose to use, there's really good tools for that. On phones and conference calls, I know for sure there is like a voice to text app that people can use but they're responsible for getting that app. Then it wouldn't be the condo board because it's installed on their end. And I don't know exactly how it works, but I do know it exists because I've had people use that. So you would just have to let them know that it's their responsibility to secure some kind of voice to text option and then a text to voice option for them to participate. And the critical thing will be, especially if it's a phone or conference call, that you ensure there is sufficient space and opportunity for the hearing impaired person to participate.
Excellent points. We have one quick last question. We'll close off the questions at that point and wrap up the meeting. Just a question. How do you make sure in either meeting to ensure everyone is heard? So tips on making sure everyone is heard, I guess, is the question.
Sure, I can jump in with the Robert's Rules and then Jen, hand it over to you, because I think that modern facilitation techniques do a better job of this, if I'm going to be honest. The way Robert's Rules works is that if you use like formal, strict Robert's Rules, everyone gets a motion gets put on the floor, and then the debate opens, and each person in the room has the right to speak to the debate for a maximum amount of time, a maximum of 2 times. And anytime that sort of 2 people raise their hands, the chair prioritizes whoever hasn't spoken yet. So and then people get to decide whether or not they want to opt in, but that's how, like in like a really, really strict reading of Robert's Rules, it's not actually possible to monopolize debate because you only get 2 tries on each motion. It also, and if you think about that, it restructures the debate so that you are trying to convince everyone in the room that you're right instead of arguing with them about why they're wrong. But it can be very restrictive, especially if you've got somebody in the room who needs to share more, like because they've got the context or they're the chair of the committee or whatever. So it's a bit of a balance.
Yeah, and then from a facilitative standpoint, how do you make sure everyone is heard? Honestly, the simplest tool is to go around and say, Amanda, did you have anything else before we wrap this up? Amanda, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Anand, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Rafaela, did you have anything else you wanted to add? And just to go through one at a time and just check in with everyone and see if they have any final comments or things they want to contribute to the conversation. The other thing is, depending on how deep you want to get into this, if some people always speak first, the chair might decide, hey, I'd like to hear, let's start the conversation on this. I'd like to hear from, and name 1 or 2 people that you don't normally hear from or don't normally start the conversation, and invite them to begin the dialogue and begin the conversation, just to make sure they have that opportunity. If there's 2 people really strongly going back and forth, step in and say, hey, this is great. We need that. Well, they're not debating back and forth if you're following Robert's Rules, because they only get 2 chances to speak. But if you're not following Robert's Rules and they're debating back and forth and going back and forth, a chair might step in and say, hey, this is really, really important. I just want to check in with everyone else and see if they have any questions or anything they want to add before we keep going. So there's a couple of kind of discussion cues that you can use to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak and be heard.
Perfect. I know there's one more question, but I know we're starting to lose people because it's a 1-hour session. I just wanted to say, we are doing a hybrid conference this year, which is, we've talked about the challenges of that, but we are taking that on June the 11th. Please join me and everybody here in our return to our conference in person, as well as being offered virtually. Early bird deadline has been extended, is my understanding. Tell everybody about it. It's going to be an amazing time. So please do join us, because it's going to be fantastic, and I'm excited about it, to see my friends again in person. Our trade show is, I believe, sold out. So a great opportunity. And I quickly want to thank our platinum sponsors for the year, Hub International Brokers, as well as BFL Canada. We couldn't do these seminars without their support. So I think that's pretty much it. Amanda, anything to add? There was a question about how to deal with belligerent and owners who are swearing and stuff like that. If you want to quickly address that, and then we'll be off to the races.
I don't have a good answer. It is a tough one. Hopefully some of the tools that we address, like the one that I find most effective is a little bit of the kindergarten method, where you explain the rules right at the beginning of the meeting. And then if somebody's being belligerent, you calmly break in and say, we've already talked about the rules. I need you to, respect your fellow community members if you're going to continue talking. But if that doesn't work, it gets kind of difficult and you start to get into escalation techniques that are outside of a meeting. It's a tough one. I totally understand, but hopefully some of the tools we talked about help. And Darlene, you're always welcome to reach out to us at the office at info@ccinorthalberta.com. And, we can try and get in touch with some folks, who are condo managers by day and awesome CCI volunteers by night, and maybe have some perspectives they can share. The only other thing I wanted to say is thank you to Jen for joining us, and thank you to Anand for hosting us. We will send out, a copy of the recording, and the slides will be available after the session. We will be sending out a survey. This was a little bit of a different format for us. We would really like you to let us know if it works for you, and if there are other topics that you'd like to see us do a little bit of a deeper dive into. So a link will go out right away here. And last thing, if this was great for you, help us grow. The more people who know that CCI exists, the more people we can assist, and the more advocacy and educational resources we are able to put out. So with that, we're going to just let the recording end. But thank you so much for joining us today, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you, Amanda. Fantastic. Thank you, Jen.